In the Hasidic tradition, we recite Psalm 27 from the first evening of Elul, from the beginning of the month of Elul, all the way through Hoshana Rabbah. And so it seems in some way fitting that we began Tomer Devorah over the summer, and we'll finish it right after Hoshana Rabbah. We'll finish it on Shmini Atzeret next week. So today I will teach chapter 8. Tomorrow I'll teach chapter 9, which is actually the last sphira, the last attribute. And then on Shmini Atzeret, I will teach chapter 10, which is the conclusion, and Rabbi Cordevero's thoughts, and then perhaps some of my own. Here we get to chapter 8. And again, this short book that a person could carry around with them, the small purple book, blue book, pink book, they make it in all different colors. We have multiple colors here in the sanctuary, I believe. This small book, somebody could carry around with them and focus on the midot, on the attributes of God, on the sphirot, each and every day. And it's part of the genius of the book, Tomer Devorah. So here we've reached chapter 8. Every chapter begins with a question. And the question is, how a person should accustom himself or herself with the attributes of netzach, hod, and yesod. Now, I'd like to just point out a couple things before we begin the chapter. If we're thinking about the sphirot as 10, let's say, steps on a ladder between us and God in a vertical sense, where God is at the top and we are here on the ground, then these sphirot, essentially, let's say that we begin at step 1, these sphirot are 2, 3, and 4, meaning to say they are the lowest 2, 3, and 4 right above our level. We started the book at Keter, we started the book on level 10, the farthest, the most descriptive of what God is. I would say the most abstract is where Rabbi Cordovero begins, because that's essentially what people want to know, right? People want to know what is at the top. So he begins, because most of us don't make it till the very end of the book. He begins by selling the first chapter. He'll tell you what's at the top. But then we get to the very end, which I actually think is probably the most useful and the most relevant to our lives. It's interesting to know what Rabbi Cordovero presumes is at the top of the ladder. But what Kabbalah teaches is that most likely there are very few people who actually get to a glimpse of the top of the ladder. Most of us dwell here on earth, and if we're lucky, we get a taste of the second rung of the ladder. We get to move up one rung. And so here we are at steps 2, 3, and 4, and we're almost at the end of the book. And again, in some ways, I think that we should study the book backwards to realize what we could do best, even if we just became a little bit better version of ourselves. Nobody moves from transgressor to pious, righteous person in the matter of, the 25-hour fast of Yom Kippur. But if everybody just moved one step, the world would be a drastically different place. We'd be dramatically better off. Okay. How should a person accustom himself with the attributes of netzach, hod, and yesod? And what is amazing here to me is that they don't even try to translate those 3 words. So I will do my best to translate netzach as eternal, hod as glorious, and yesod as foundational. Again, yesod being foundational, right above where we stand on ground as our foundation. But really, what we begin to learn through the study of Rabbi Cordovero and the Kabbalistic tradition is that we think we're standing on ground as the bedrock of our existence, when in fact, the bedrock of our existence is actually God. And so, however, regarding the rectifications of Netzach and Hod, some are common to both, and others are unique to each one. And so basically, the beginning of this says, I'm going to treat Netzach and Hod together, and I'm going to deal with Yesod on its own. Now first, one should help those who study Torah and support them, whether with money or in deeds, providing them with the things they require for their learning, preparing their food and fulfilling all their desires, so they need not cease their Torah study. And so if we were saying we don't want to deal in the world of the abstract, what is the most concrete representation of God that we have here on earth? For Jews, it's simple. It's the Torah. And we learned that as a tradition. We learned that as a community. On Yom Kippur, the Torah touched the floor of the sanctuary. Other items, like a siddur or a kippah, can touch the floor of the sanctuary, and what do? We just pick it up and kiss it, right? And it's not such a big deal. Or, my kids would have been fasting for much of their life already. But this is a copy. This is a representation of holiness. We understand this was published by human beings, and the liturgy and this is a second degree from holiness, the Siddur. The Torah in the Ark is actual holiness. And for that reason, it can't contract impurity, no matter what happens to the Torah. I don't know if people have thought of this, but the Torah can touch the ground. Nothing happened to the Torah. Something happened to our community. If the Torah could contract impurity, think about the Torahs that were taken by the Nazis and stacked in warehouses, and how now they are taken and given to day schools all throughout the world, and children chant out of those Torahs because the Torahs could not contract impurity. The community and societies around the Torahs in that hellish Europe, that is what contracted the impurity. And so we as a community we're in the process of a tikkun, of correcting that for ourselves. 40 days of tzedakah that's going to be given to Leket to feed hungry in Israel. That'll end with a siyum, the celebration of Torah here in our community. But nothing happens to the Torah. The Torah is our physical representation of godliness, of holiness, that we have as a gift from God. And so when Rabbi Cordovero is looking for something in between the world in which we live that we'll see in the next chapter, and in between the abstract of Keter and Bina and Chokhmah and wisdom and understanding at the top of the ladder, when he's looking for a very physical representation of something that we can relate to, the thing that he goes to that is above us by a step or two is the Torah. So every time we study Torah, we're actually reaching for that step on the ladder. And for people who study it often, they might actually be able to make that step or two a couple times in their life, a few times in their life. They might be able to dwell there for a period of time. And for others, we learn Torah on a less regular basis, in a less formal way, and we might get a glimpse of that second or third step. And so it's our job to support the study of Torah, whether or not we do it often ourselves. One should also be careful not to disparage their learning, lest they weaken in their toil in Torah. Rather, a person should honor and praise the good deeds so that they will hold steadfast to their service. And again, I don't want to focus on modern Israeli politics. I don't want to focus on modern Israeli politics, but I do a lot of reading about the early stages of Zionism for the program that I'm in. And a person could very easily understand David Ben-Gurion's thinking in the early stages that there were no Talmud scholars left in the world, that the Shoah had wiped out the type of Torah study, and that there needed to be 10, perhaps 100 people in Israel that were supported to study and bring that sense of holiness back into the world. If that's not the point, then what is the point of us creating a homeland and trying to return? What are we returning to? So we're returning to the land. There also has to be a spiritual component. And the fact that he recognized that from an early stage without any understanding of the type of quandary that we'd be in just shows that he's human. But there was a logic in the fact that Torah study allows us to raise our spirituality And in some way, that should be a value of the Jewish people. I'm going to skip down towards the bottom. Everyone should contribute according to his or her ability, however little or much. Ultimately, the more one does to honor the Torah and strengthen it, whether verbally, physically, or financially, arousing people's hearts to Torah and inspiring them to hold steadfast to it, is all connected and rooted in these two sfirot, in these two attributes of netzach and hod, of eternal and glorious. For they are called, if you look in the Hebrew, mipnei shehem nikraim machzikim ba v'tomcheha. And if we don't recognize that from just moments ago here on the bima, we chanted together, Eitz chayim hi lama chazikim ba v'tomcheha meushar. I know, it's not as good as Dale, but we have to recognize that idea, we say it all the time without larger context of what it is that we're saying. Eitz chayim hi, it is the tree of life, meaning the Torah is the tree of life, lamachazikim ba, for those who grasp onto it. V'tomcheha meushar, and the supporters of it will be enriched. We don't talk about whether it's financially enriched, spiritually enriched, whatever it might be. And I also think Rabbi Cordovero doesn't say whether it's financially enriched, spiritually enriched, but we know the Jews who live lives of Torah, however we think that is, they are enriched in their lives. That is the hope. And that is what Rabbi Cordovero is saying, is that idea of holding on to Torah gives us a sense of the eternal. We're reading the words of our grandparents, we're reading the words of their grandparents and their grandparents. We all studied the same Torah. It gives us a sense of the eternal, and it gives us a sense of glorious, because we think of it as a gift from the Almighty. Now let's turn the page. This is the only chapter in the book that then presents a second question. Ve'ulam, he'ach yargil ha'adam atzmo b'midat ha'yesod. And then how should a person accustom himself or herself with the attribute of yesod, the attribute of the foundational element of God in the world? Now we're at the step right above where we live. We're looking right up at the ladder at the next step, is yesod. One must be extremely careful of the kind of speech that leads to licentious thoughts so as not to cause wasteful, now here it'll say emission, but I would like to say wasteful energy. Okay? And I think that this chapter becomes more and more relevant with every passing year. Meaning to say, when a person wants to engage in what is foundational about the world, what is fundamental in the world, there are several aspects of the world that a person could engage in. There are several aspects of the world that Jews could engage in. I mean, this sits squarely for me as a person who has studied to be a rabbi and as a person who very much wanted to be a part of the business, let's just say, of Hollywood. There are two drastically different fundamental core ideas of what is valued and important in the world. And many of the people who thought that those values were important, that behavior was important, those people have now been in the news and they continue to be reported one by one by one. The idea that that's promiscuous language and that behavior, the licentious thoughts is what I'm saying, that is essentially our animal instinct that the Alter Rebbe explains in the Tanya, the first Lebovitz Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman. He explains that we're all made up of two aspects of our being, the animal instinct and the spiritual instinct. Here is the understanding of the licentious behavior is actually the core of the animal instinct. That's the way that animals behave in the wild. And if that's all we're going to be, then that's all we're going to be. But if we desire to be something greater than animals in the wild, there has to be a pathway to that, and here is where it's fundamental. Needless to say, a person should not use foul language. Rather, a person should be on guard against pure speech that leads to licentious thoughts, dangerous. This idea can be derived from the language in the verse, do not allow your mouth to bring sin to your flesh in Kohelet. And I think this points to the idea that our mouths can get us in serious trouble. Our mouths can get us in serious trouble. We now jump to the very next paragraph. Further, caution is necessary since Yesod also corresponds to the covenant of the rainbow. We're going to meet that story in just a few weeks. Brita Keshet, remember from the end of the story of Noach, that God creates the covenant through the rainbow. I will not destroy the earth again. Everybody remembers that story? Yes? As the attribute of Malchut is the target. Okay, so now we have Malchut is the sphere, the level that we live on, and we're saying there's a relationship between these two. We could choose just to live here and assume that there's nothing beyond. And if we do that, then essentially we speak and act and behave as we want as animals. If we assume that there is something beyond, then we expect from one another elevated behavior, respectful speech, behavior with honor. That is, a person should not draw his bow, that is, cause himself in any way to have an arousal or to be, excited by any of this temptation, unless it is, I would say, appropriate, if I want to raise this up off of the text. Anything beyond this would cause the attribute of Yesod to become flawed, God forbid. With our very first step out of ourselves, make it the right type of step. Meaning your first step out of yourselves could be the wrong step. You could have the wrong goal. It could be the wrong process. You could be pointed in the wrong direction. When we go on vacation sometimes, we drive to Arizona sometimes at the end of the summer when it's nice and warm. And out of the hotel, I will, let's say one time, and I did this one time, and I'm reminded of it each and every time by my wonderful wife and children, that I made a left turn and drove for miles and miles when the freeway is really only like 2 blocks from the hotel, right? The first step I made was a wrong step. I was headed in the wrong direction. And it was, in fact, my stubbornness that said, no, we saw this car dealership. This car dealership is exactly the right direction. I'm telling you, for miles and miles and miles, and I didn't realize that there are like 100 car dealerships on this road in Arizona. We could all try to get out of ourselves, and we could all try to raise ourselves as human beings, our spirits, and we could be doing it with the very wrong intentions, with the wrong, or perhaps the right intentionality in the wrong direction. Anything beyond this would cause the attribute of Yesod, this foundational first step, to become flawed, God forbid. This requires extreme great caution, mainly in guarding oneself from these types of thoughts. How many of us try to better ourselves, and we say that we're doing it for the reasons of compassion, when in fact we're doing it for reasons of pride? How many of us say that we're trying to better ourselves, and we aren't actually honest with what is wrong with ourselves in the first place? What Rabbi Cordovero is warning against is that here, in this kind of liminal space between the very first step and our goal, which I think is so appropriate to talk about now during Sukkot, when we have this space of the sukkah that's not quite inside and not quite outside, we live in a kind of very fragile state. And we have to know that our goal is actually the right type of goal. Just like we create a sukkah that is absolutely gorgeous and is sealed off to the outside world, right, with 4 walls. And the sukkah is, in fact, not kosher because it's not open to people in the community to walk into our sukkah. We could say that I am on a journey alone by myself and leave out everybody else that's important in my life. And then I think Rabbi Cordovero would say that you are, in fact, not on the right type of journey. You are not pointed in the right direction. You are foundationally making a mistake from the get-go. And it's that first step, I think, which actually is the most important one. Sukkot provides us with an opportunity to make our first step of the year the right step. Let's decide to make good decisions. Chag Sameach.